Hello, everybody. It's Donna Cravata, and we are back again for another Real 50 over 50. And today we have one of my newly favorite people, Helen Hirsh Spence, and she is a TEDx and international keynote speaker. She's an age provocateur and a leading voice in longevity literacy, which we'll talk quite a bit about today. She's an executive coach and trainer and the founder of the top 60 over 60s. So she's got me beat.
Yeah, sure.
Welcome, Helen. It's so nice to see you today.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks, Donna, for the invitation.
Yeah, I really am looking forward to talking to you. So, as I was listening to your TED talk, Embrace Age with a Longevity Mindset, which was released in June,
No, July.
July, and the month that it was released, she got over 100,000 views in 1 month, which is amazing. And, one of the things that you said right at the beginning was 2 people are turning 65 every second worldwide, and then you posed the question, "How old is old?"
I
Start
did.
there.
I start there.
Start
Well,
there.
so I may have exaggerated, but not intentionally. That was a statistic I found, but is perhaps a little bit less. But the reality is that a quarter almost of the Canadian population is already 65 and older. There are about
Mhm.
12 or 13,000 Americans turning 65 every single day. And we're not replacing ourselves the way we used to. So fertility rates are really, really down. And this is worldwide, especially
Mhm.
true in developing countries. There are a few especially true in developed countries. Excuse me, I misspoke. In
Mhm.
developing countries, not as much, but it's tending in that same direction. So the
Mhm.
world is aging much faster than it's reproducing. And that
Mhm.
means that there's a serious, serious demographic shift that's taking place that most people are not acknowledging, although we've known about it since the 1980s. You remember boom, bust,
Mhm.
echo? Famous, but nobody has changed their thinking or adjusted policies or procedures accordingly. So we're in
Right.
a real bind, I would say, economically, as well as individually and community-wise or society-wise, because we haven't really progressed with the times. And it's
No,
hugely problematic. On the
it is.
healthcare front in particular, you can imagine. Well, I just read that a quarter of the population is over 65 and a quarter of the population is under 20.
Mm.
So and that's in Canada I'm referring to in
Mhm.
this particular case. So
Okay, so that leads me to kind of bring up the topic of how you got to where you are, because you have a really interesting background. So, take us back to where Helen started.
well, I started 75 years ago, to be
Mhm,
precise. And I believe in role modeling what we need to start to do, which is
mhm,
acknowledging what our age is
mhm,
so that people are not aghast when they're asked, how old are you? So 75 years ago, I was born actually in New York to European parents. And I won't go into detail there.
mhm,
But I became an educator because I love traveling. And I got a job when I was over in Germany as a teacher of English and French in a German school. I swore to my father I'd never be a teacher. But that was the start of my career as an educator. From
mhm,
Germany, I came to Canada. And again, I had to start over because they wouldn't take any of the credits and the experience. And I had a career as a high school teacher, a high school principal, the president of the Ontario Principals Council. I was responsible for 5,000 for the professional um, sort of development, and it was an association. It was not a union for 5,000 principals and vice principals across Ontario in the early 2000s. And from there, I decided to delve into independent schools, which everybody
Mhm.
thinks are private schools, but they're different. An independent school being from JK here, which was 4-year-olds, up to grade 13 at the time, and did that for about 4 or 5 years. And from there, I stepped away from my formal career of education and did a ton of not-for-profit work all over the world. And then in my late 60s, I found myself questioning who I was, what am I doing,
Mhm.
believing that I was over the hill and I couldn't do anything, but I knew I had tons and tons of energy left to do more significant things.
Yeah.
And I reinvented myself at age 67 and learned about social entrepreneurship and became an entrepreneur. Started Top 60 Over 60, which I called Top 60 Over 60 because my initial intent was to do nothing more than raise awareness about the contributions of older adults by highlighting an event. And now I am very eagerly looking for sponsors to help me make sure that this takes place. But I've been sidetracked working on research, finding out about what it means to age in the 21st century, trying to debunk myths about what it means to be older today. And more or less, reframe the whole narrative around aging to match with what aging means today in the 2020s and what it'll mean in the future. Because we unfortunately have this notion that 65 is the magic number for retirement, which was a definite need or desire in the 1930s when it was established for Social Security purposes.
Yeah.
The average lifespan was 62 then. Now it's over 80. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
hello.
When I worked in the law firm, they forced retirement on partners
They
at
still
age
do.
at 62.
They still do here. 60 in a lot of different, especially law firms, they are the absolute worst
Yeah.
in terms of, and even though we have
In terms of
anti-age
anything related to
legislation.
being human.
Pardon me? Sorry.
In terms of anything related to being human.
Well, it is true. I mean, but it's also unfortunate because that's when people are thriving. They have the cognitive ability still, contrary to what many people believe. They're more creative, they're more productive. Older adults have a performance edge. We as a society don't credit older people with the value that they really deserve.
No.
And I'm not just saying that because I'm older. I'm saying that because it's research based and I've done so much work in this area.
Yeah. Well, there's research and it's your lived
Yeah,
experience.
that too, of course. Yeah,
When those two things combine, that's a very powerful
it is.
truth.
Yeah, but we don't give, so, if you're a doctor with 35 years experience, you are given credit for being the doctor and knowing more, and it's something to be prized. But in organizations and businesses, you're getting rid of people with that kind of experience when it's equally as valuable. So,
Yeah. It's considered a liability, not an
yeah,
asset.
yeah. And that's all a mistake and
Mhm.
has to change if, in fact, we want our economies to thrive into this century. So
Yeah,
we're really at a transition point in many respects, you
I
know?
think so too. Before we move on to kind of talking about like what you're doing now, I just want to kind of touch on two things in your
Sure.
past. One is like what happened when you started traveling? Because you shared some really great stories in your TED talk about traveling and you were traveling with students. So
No, only once
okay,
or twice. No, I was
okay,
on my own almost always.
oh,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah,
share.
sure. So I got involved when I retired from my career in some not-for-profit boards. I had always been part of them, but for instance, Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, I became the chair of that after a couple of years, and I stayed on her board for 10 years, and I'm still involved and quite actively. But I also became a member of the Canadian Executive Services overseas, and in that capacity, what they did was use my skills and experience, and the fact that I spoke 4 languages fluently. So I would apply for jobs, for instance, advisory roles in remote places such as Bolivia or Honduras. And what they did is they have a process whereby you have to actually apply for the job, essentially, and then you're selected or you're not. Well, I was selected in a number of different places. In Bolivia, I was working with a Baha'i university to help them develop communication skills for their leadership team. In Bolivia, that was Bolivia. In Honduras, I was working with the Honduran tourism industry because they have a really bad reputation for crime and everything in Honduras. And so I was working with actually the Honduras tourism agency to help them understand how to engage employees, how to keep them engaged about growth and learning. So I remember, and this is a great story, one woman in the 2-week seminars that I was giving on site, I was there. She said to me, "Why do you constantly ask us questions and get us involved in the conversations? Why don't you just tell us what we need to know?" You know, because she had a traditional, educational background in which, you gave people knowledge and they were supposed to internalize it and use it, right? Whereas we have come a lot further and understand that there are different learning styles and different preferences. But that was really interesting. I was up in the Arctic, for instance, in the Canadian Arctic, working with the Inuit on board governance. So I've developed a lot of different areas of expertise over my leadership experience, and so I was able to share that. And I went to India. This had nothing to, I organized these trips myself as well. I wanted to visit places, but wherever I went, I wanted to offset my carbon footprint. So I volunteered and I found something I could do. So in India, I was coaching a principal of a private school in the Himalayas about having a co-ed environment. So most schools in India have been single gender, but this was a principal who was having challenges with girl students or with parents. So that was one really exciting adventure, and I was there for about 6 weeks. From there, I went to Bhutan, which is a Himalayan kingdom between China and India, and I love trekking and in what you were referring to before with students is, yes, I always believed in role modeling the kind of leadership that I thought others should get involved in. So I climbed in one of my schools to the summit of Kilimanjaro with my students, and we built a school at the base of the mountain. In another instance, I went to the Andes and I climbed the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, and there again we did community service in the mountains up there. So in Bhutan, I was engaged in putting together a tourism brochure for Western eyes, and I was given a guide and a driver, but there are hardly any roads, so it was mostly just trekking up into the Himalayas, and I had access to all sorts of Buddhist shrines, and you can't really get into a lot of these temples, but I was able to take pictures because it was for the Tourism Bureau of Bhutan. So those are a couple of examples, and I always did that on my own, although I'm married and have been for 47 years. My husband wasn't interested in the same things that I was, but he never stood in my way, fortunately.
That's amazing.
And I just would go off. And most of these things I'm describing took place in my 60s, which is why,
That's incredible.
Yeah. So I'm privileged in that I have good health, And then what I did is I combined the expertise. I really am a firm believer in getting out of your comfort zone once a year at least. And I surely did that when I slept on the floors in Bhutan and, in tents all over the world in the mountains. But I believe that it's necessary for growth to make sure that you stretch yourself all the time at every age, physically and mentally.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. And I mean, that's amazing. And like just taking those years as an educator, as a principal, as a leader of principals,
Mhm.
and taking that and bringing that across the world with knowing four languages, being able to communicate
Mhm.
effectively in all of these different different cultures and different countries. It's fascinating. And then how this is all culminated. How did this turn in? This is the second question I had. How did this kind of evolve into the top 60 over 60?
Well, it's two things I would say. And I want to mention these two experiences because they had everything to do with what I refer to as intergenerational collaboration or multi-generational work. The first was a student who came back from Nepal when I was a high school principal and said, Mrs. Spence, you could do something like this too. She gave me a couple of connections, and between a couple of jobs, I decided, Laura really was inspirational. She had an amazing adventure. I'm sure I could do this too. And through the name that she gave me, I connected with somebody in Nepal and took off for a month trekking in Nepal. And she had given me her diary and stayed in touch. We're still close. And the other experience that shaped my life tremendously was at the girls' school where I was the head. Somia, who just had a baby, she's early 30s now. She always would come back to me for references, and we became very close, and her mother too. And I gave her a scholarship. She was a Rhodes Scholar, but one of the things that she applied for was for what was called the Next 36, which was an entrepreneurial summer camp, let's put it that way, here in Toronto, which is where I am at the moment. And they had a graduation, and she invited me, of course, to it. I didn't know anything about social entrepreneurship. She introduced me to it,
Mm.
and then she took me put me on her advisory, which had to do with social impact investing. Also, something totally new to me. I mean, social entrepreneurship, and here I am in my late 60s. That didn't exist in the 1950s and 60s or 70s.
Oh, no.
So it was a whole new world. I took courses on social entrepreneurship. I found myself a coach who I'm going to see again tomorrow, who's 30 years younger than me, who said, you can do whatever you want. Doesn't matter how old you are. And I started a business at 67. And it was a whole new world of discovery and learning and growth. So what I've done, I was always in business, more or less, running schools,
Mhm.
but I wasn't always responsible for the roofs myself or the accounting.
Oh, and
I
and
had
and,
staff,
the definite parameters were there. You didn't have to make them up.
you know. But here I've had to learn everything. I mean, I had an assistant who would type up notes, and that was, of course, before computers and with computers. And because I was a woman, I have to say that the head admin assistants were not as accommodating when you were a woman principal as if you had been a man. So I did a lot for myself, but nothing compared to what I've had to learn as an entrepreneur.
Wow.
But what really launched me in this direction is the fact that I lost my way. I thought that I was useless because I was over 60 and people were not looking at me in the same way. They didn't reach out for my expertise anymore. I was experiencing ageism.
Mhm.
And when I realized how impactful that was for me, who had had tons of leadership experience, it made me realize that, in particular, women, not only women, but men as well, how debilitating it was and how it could undermine the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided to focus on longevity, uh, a lot of brain research about the fact that we have a hell of a lot more control over our older years than we thought. Reframing the whole narrative that it's not about decline. On the contrary, we have mm, abilities of influence, our better judgment, better problem solving skills. We have more knowledge, even though it may be harder. The one thing that people confuse with decline is the fact that our mental processing, cognitive, is sometimes slower. But if you liken that to a hard drive in a computer that's got so much in there, it takes longer to retrieve some of the information, but it's there,
It's
you
there.
know? And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about aging. And when you do action research like I've done over the years, you realize that when you engage audiences, that when you ask them, tell me 3 words that you associate with aging, they're almost 90% of them are negative. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, and that's what I've spent the last several years doing.
Okay, now you just said a phrase that I'd like to know more about, action research.
Oh, so as opposed to statistical action research, so I'll do a workshop or whatever, and to engage the audience, or when I speak with an audience, I'll ask them, okay, turn to your neighbor and ask, you know, what aging means to them, and give them 3 words, and I would write it down, and I would
Okay.
keep that, and I'd tally all of that up over time and see what the words were. You know, that's action research as opposed
Okay.
to.
Do you have a list of those words?
I do. I do.
I want that list.
Okay, sure. Sure, sure. I mean, the other thing is, asking the question, this is also something that you can talk about with qualitative research, is how old is old? I'd always
Yeah.
ask that to people. And what I found was old is almost always 20 years older than whatever you are. So if I'm 35, old is
Okay.
55. And what's young? It's 20 years younger than me. So I remember walking around, in high schools in the hallways and listening, and then doing cafeteria duty and listening to, teenagers talking about their parents, and oh my God, they still have sex and things like that, and laughing. And I couldn't help saying, listening and saying, what are you talking about? Do you think it ends when you're 17 or what?
Yeah, and you don't know nothing yet, right?
You haven't got a clue. It gets better too, let me tell you. So anyway.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so now we touched a little bit on multiple generations
Yes, which
working
is key
together.
key to
Yeah.
the
So,
future.
I mean, like, let's just have the rest of this conversation about that, because I think that, I mean, I'm with you. It's the information that we have, if we don't share this
Mhm.
now, so much of the way life and work
Right.
existed
Yeah,
will be lost. And granted, some of that just needs to go. But there are things too that really need to be passed along.
absolutely. And so, I mean, one of the pieces that I'm very proud of in my past too is I did a lot of work with mentorship, with
Mhm.
educators, with teachers, with admin staff, with principals, and developed numerous programs that were even adopted, here in Ontario in a variety of different ways. And what I would say is that what's critical today is not mentorship in the traditional way, but what I refer to as reciprocal mentorship. In other words, it doesn't work. I mean, young people today, they may think highly of some older people in their lives, but they need the respect as well for
Yeah.
what they know and what they can share. And we need to give them that opportunity. It's absolutely critical, you
Yes.
know? So when I was growing up, I was lucky if I had a grandmother. I had one. 3 generations being around at the same time was the norm.
Mhm.
Today, there are 6 generations around at the same time, and 5 generations are now working together. When you've got progressive organizations and businesses that understand the value of age diversity, which I want you to know is omitted from 92% of diversity strategies globally. People don't consider age as one of them, but it's is as important as race or gender, or because what it does is it intersects with absolutely every other diversity. And so you multiply the perspectives when you bring age into the mix. It's so exciting,
Yeah,
you know?
it really is. It really is. And then I also agree with you about that respect needs to go back and forth. I mean, and the mentorship back and forth. Um, this reflects deeply in the work that Chip Conley has done with
MEA.
Wisdom at Work and the
Mhm.
Modern Elder Society, and also the movie Interns, the internship with
Yeah,
Robert De Niro, right?
yeah.
And we all have value to bring, and like if we can take what we know individually and bring that together, like what's possible. And that's
Oh,
really what gets me excited, is what's
mhm.
possible. We spend so much time focusing on the negative and
Right,
what is no
right.
longer, but what
Mhm.
if we flip that entire story into what's possible? I mean, it can change everything.
Well, we've lived in a very age-segregated society in the 20th century. So
Mhm,
by that, I mean, mass education was brought in to being in the 20th century, but we've
mhm.
gone way too far with that segregation, and it's not even good to look at mass. We shouldn't be separating grade ones and grade threes. They should be working together in a
No.
different way, but we haven't gotten
Mhm.
that far yet. Having been an
Yeah,
educator, I really lament the fact that we are still looking at ages. I should be learning alongside
yeah,
18-year-olds and
yeah,
20-year-olds and 30-year-olds. And all of that will start to happen as the norm, but we're still really stuck in an old
yeah.
way of thinking, and that lens is flawed. So we really, really need to change that as soon as possible. Having retirement homes and retirement communities are really have proven to be maybe effective in one way, but the fact that we can't continue to live that way
Oh,
because we can't separate. We need older people to take care of younger people. We need younger people to take care of the older ones. That whole multi-generational household, which is
mhm.
very typical in many Asian societies and South American, it's still the norm. We need to go back to that. And we are by default, not by design, but because young people cannot afford to buy housing. So we're living together more and more. Or
And also the cost of
that's right.
nursing facilities is ridiculous, and they will take your house.
Well, and for a variety of reasons. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a whole new map of life design, and we're not taking advantage of it. So, if there's any message that I would give to younger people today is do not try and cram everything into those first 20, 30 years of your profession, because 20-year-olds today are going to be working into the 70s and 80s
Mhm.
as a norm. So everybody will be able to take more time. We see it happening already. Mothers are having babies later.
Yeah.
They want to have careers. They can do that, but they can also take the time for children and
Mhm.
then stop, have a gap,
Yeah.
reimagine the future because it's so much longer. And you need to financially prepare for those things, but
Mhm.
it's going to become much more the norm. And working, this one career business is out the window.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
careers don't exist for 90% of the jobs that are going to be available to
No,
my
no,
grandchildren who are going
it's
to
not
have
invented yet. It's up to
100,
them to invent it.
that's right. They have 100-year lives on average.
Yeah.
So, we need to really stop thinking. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of sustainability for the future of businesses and economies,
Mhm.
but also in terms of the way in which we think about our lives and how to, you know, repurpose our skills in an ongoing way.
Oh, I love that.
We need to reimagine all sorts of things. And that's why innovation and entrepreneurship is so important. And that's also why women in particular are becoming much more successful because finally in their 50s, with your real 50 over 50, they don't have the children at home in the same way. They
Right.
often are divorced, widowed, or separated. Their parents may be older, but they finally have time to use and develop all of those organizational skills, even if they were stay at home. And I don't mean even, I can't think of anything more important to
Yeah.
do than being with your children.
But
And
that's a job.
it's a full-time job, but it gives you all sorts of other experience and
Yeah.
expertise that is not, unfortunately, valued to the extent that it needs to be.
No, it's not. I mean, I quit my job and I started my business when my son was 4 because I'm a single parent.
Right.
I knew, like, it wasn't feasible for me to have
No.
that job and raise a child. I wouldn't know him, and I wasn't okay with that. So, I was a pioneer in
Mhm.
online businesses in 2006, and
Absolutely.
it just felt like my best possible option, and I took my own personal savings to get myself
Sure.
started because the way I looked at it was, I had to make an investment in myself.
That's right.
And if I had to go back to school, that would have cost me money. If any number of things would have cost me money. So I said, I'm going to take this money and I'm going to give myself the gift of creating a business. And I was able to be here for my child,
Hmm.
and it made all the difference in the world. He
It
wouldn't
does.
be
Yeah.
who he is today.
Hmm.
He, was raised by other people.
Hmm. I mean, it's very interesting how all of these things that are becoming normalized in today's world were exceptional back then. I
Yeah.
mean, I was like the third or fourth female secondary school principal in the district that I was working in. But I went to work. My husband stayed at home with the children, which was totally uh,
Unheard of. Yeah.
unheard of in the early 1980s when he was there. And I got lots of negative comments.
I mean, even in the early 2000s when I was around, like, because I would go to the park with my son, I had the flexibility to work my schedule. And there was one dad, just one dad.
Yeah.
And he was like, I was the only person that would talk to him. Nobody would even talk to him.
My husband was the duty mom at cooperative nursery school
Mhm.
in rural Ontario in 1981. So they wouldn't change it to duty dad. It was duty mom, you know, duty mom David, you know.
Dude,
The kids loved it because they could, wrestle, do
yeah,
all sorts of different things. And he didn't mind either because his
yeah,
confidence was intact.
yeah.
But but it was hard. There's no question about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when my son got into elementary school, he went to a very unique elementary school. It was the last school left in New York State with no walls. They
Yeah.
did this experimental thing during the
Yeah.
70s. But like what you were saying before, like knowing the different grades, like
Mhm.
kindergarten was one big space. There were three kindergarten classes, but it was called team space. So
Oh,
kids knew all the teachers, all the other kids. We did things together, and the
right.
parents were invited to come up. There was a group of parents, two parents for each class, every single day that were there to help. So the kids got to know other parents.
Yeah,
Parents got to know each other. I mean, this created such a bond in this class,
of course.
all the way through to high school. Even now, I'm still friends with these people. So is
It's
my
great. It's
and,
wonderful.
but once they got to first, second, third grade, the classes were all kind of merged together. So, like, the first graders got to know who the second grade and the third grade teachers were
Yeah,
before they moved up,
I
which
know.
was really special. And then fourth grade there were walls for fourth grade for some reason. And that was my son's least successful year in school.
Oh,
He didn't like it.
well, he probably was an extrovert like you, huh?
Um, yeah, yes and no.
Yeah.
He's
Anyway.
Yeah, but it was just, there were no surprises.
Mm.
You knew what was around you. It was just such a safe and warm, inviting place. And it opened up for different kinds of learning, which was really nice. And, he doesn't fit in a box, that's for sure.
You don't want him to?
No, no, not at all. But, yeah, this has been amazing, and there's been so many more things I wanted to know about you, so I'm really glad that we've had this conversation, and, um, I think what the work that you're doing is so incredibly important, and we'll be sharing this far and wide. And I like to end these interviews with, sharing a wisdom bomb. So something
Oh,
short and actionable, or maybe something you wanted to talk about that we didn't have a chance to talk about. Um,
you know what? I mean, it's the message I would give to anybody who's younger today, if this is appropriate. I don't know. Give yourself the time you need in life. Don't push too hard. Give yourself time to develop, to imagine, to dream, and just don't be in such a hurry.
yeah,
I wish I hadn't been in such a hurry, but my life was more time limited than young people have today, you know?
yeah.
That's why I'm so eager to do so much now because I know that the runway's a lot shorter than it used to be.
And you're not close to being done, so you've got
No,
lots to
no,
do. You've
no.
got lots to do.
Lots to
So everybody, please connect with Helen at top60over60.com. She's also here in the Real 50 Over 50 community. And have a great Wednesday.
Yeah.
Actually, we're not
Have
going
a,
to be back.
no, I was going to say it's Thanksgiving weekend for
Yeah,
Americans.
yeah. I actually had an interview booked for last week and they canceled it, and I didn't rebook it.
Oh, okay.
So we're gonna
There you
we're gonna take a week off, but we will be back in December, and we are booked all the way into June.
Well, I hope we get a chance to talk again, Donna. This has been great.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
will. We will. Thank you, Helen. I appreciate everything that you shared.
Thanks.